In the dead of night, under the cloak of darkness, Ukrainian drones roared across the border and struck a key stretch of Russian gas pipeline infrastructure. The hour was late, past midnight, when operators detected faint signals of drone ingress at the remote gas line corridor. Within minutes, explosives aboard the unmanned aerial vehicles detonated along the pipeline's pressure-regulating stations, triggering massive rupture, fires, and gas venting that lit the tundra in a ghostly flame. The sudden blast echoed through the silent Russian countryside. The howling winds carried the roar of explosions, the hiss of escaping gas, and the distant crackling of steel under stress. Local monitoring stations recorded sharp pressure drops in the pipeline network, and within dozens of minutes, emergency alarms flashed across regional gas control centers in Russia's energy ministries. From Kiev to Moscow, analysts replayed satellite feeds showing the ballistic arcs of fiery plumes rising above the pipeline trench. The strike was precise. The drones had been programmed to hit vulnerable joints, weld seams, and pressure valves, areas notoriously difficult to defend. Russia's air defense systems, already stretched thin by multiple fronts, were caught off guard. By the time Russian countermeasures activated, the drones had vanished into the night, leaving a scene of devastation. The blackout in the pipeline's flow rippled outward, downstream industrial zones lost feedstock, gas compressor stations had to shut down, and emergency vents dangled molten sparks into the frigid air. The scene marked one of Ukraine's boldest direct strikes on the Russian energy lifeline. In the hours that followed, chaos unfurled in both warring states. Russian authorities scrambled repair crews, military convoys, and riot control units to the site. The pipeline corridor, once a quiet, heavily patrolled strategic asset, turned into a battlefield. Soldiers in vapor masks marched along charred earth, while gas engineers in heat suits tried to stem the inferno with foam suppressants and remote-controlled valves. But the damage was deep. The main trunk had split, multiple manifolds had failed, and supporting infrastructure like power lines, communication nodes, and maintenance roads had been burned or sabotaged. Meanwhile, in Moscow, high-level meetings were convened in emergency. Energy ministers, security chiefs, and pipeline corporate boards huddled to assess fallout. The calculation was stark: how to keep the flow going, how to deter further incursions, and how to strike back without overextending. In Kiev, meanwhile, command centers buzzed with success. Ukrainian intelligence poured over damage reports confirming that more than 30% of the targeted section was irreparably damaged, that backup routing options were compromised, and that Russian logistics for energy throughput were now under severe strain. Drone operators reviewed telemetry, GPS logs, infrared flame signatures, and video streams of the impact sites. Victory messages circulated: gas war initiated, disrupt the bloodline of fuel, let Russia feel winter. The propaganda apparatus amplified the strike's significance. Drones had penetrated deep, struck a vital artery, and hampered the enemy's energy resilience. The ripple effects were immediate. Forecasts of shortages in downstream Russian regions, emergency rationing of gas for civilian heating in remote areas, stockpiling of backup gas in storage hubs, and emergency appeals to energy partners to shore up supply slack. But the unexpected happened next: backlash, sabotage, counterattacks, and escalation. Overnight, Russia launched retaliatory drone strikes against Ukraine's own energy grid, targeting substations, gas compression stations, and even pumping stations inside Ukrainian-held territory. Explosions rocked major Ukrainian cities, plunging neighborhoods into darkness and cutting off heating to thousands. The Russian response was measured. Not all retaliatory drones reached their targets, but enough did damage to sow fear and strain Ukraine's defenses. The energy war had become a tit-for-tat dance, with each side pushing harder. At the pipeline section in Russia, sabotage crews, some possibly local collaborators or covert agents, were suspected of further damaging the lines under cover of calls for repair. Infiltration reports emerged: drones dropping timed charges, small teams cutting safety wires, and drone swarms harassing repair convoys. Russian military police and security services moved to seal off the entire industrial corridor, erecting checkpoints, deploying counter-UAV jamming systems, and executing arrests. The scene turned into a fraught security zone. Repair engineers accompanied by armored escorts, skyward radar arrays scanning continually, and drones patrolling overhead to deter further incursions. Each action amplified tensions. Each flare of retributive attack threatened to spiral into broader conflict beyond the energy sphere. In Ukraine, the government prepared for the costs. The Energy Ministry warned of escalating Russian reprisals. The defense sector repositioned drone units for defense and offense, and the civil administration mobilized contingency plans for blackouts. International partners watching closely expressed concern about escalation and energy warfare spilling into civilian harm. Propaganda on both sides doubled down. Russia called Ukraine energy terrorists. Ukraine framed itself as striking a just blow against the engine of aggression. The pipeline strike may have been surgical, but the consequences had grown into a full-blown energy siege. As days passed, the strategic, economic, and humanitarian consequences deepened. Russian regional governors reported dwindling gas pressure in northern oblasts, reduced deliveries to industrial complexes, and rising consumer complaints of heating shortages. The downstream gas network buckled, pressure stations forced blackouts or rolling cuts to conserve reserves. Russian state media scrambled to assure citizens, repairs underway, flows will resume. But in private, energy officials estimated full restoration would take weeks, even months, due to damage in remote terrain and limited access under security constraints. Ukraine, meanwhile, capitalized on its momentum. Western backers expressed alarm at Russia's vulnerability and began discussions of bolstered air defense systems, counter-drone arrays, sanctions, and perhaps targeted strikes on further Russian energy nodes. In Ukraine, gas and power utilities prepared for Russian knockback, reinforcing key nodes, hardening lines, shifting loads, and securing spare parts. Local civil authorities braced for Russian missile and drone retaliation targeting civilian infrastructure. Residential heating in frontline areas became a critical issue. Public communications urged conservation and emergency readiness. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces pressed across the front, leveraging Russia's mounting logistical strain in combining kinetic offensives with energy disruption. On the international scene, the strike reverberated through energy markets. Gas prices jumped, futures markets reacted, and analysts warned of ripple effects in European supply chains, especially for those reliant on Russian natural gas. NATO and EU officials monitored escalation risk. Would Russia respond with strikes on Ukrainian or European infrastructure? Would energy warfare spill into global markets? Diplomatic cables circulated, calling for de-escalation, pressure to limit attacks on civilian infrastructure, and investigations into violations of international energy security norms. In the aftermath, the world saw how fragile modern energy systems can be in wartime. The pipeline strike had cracked open a new front, the war of gas, pipelines, and energy lifelines. Russia, though bruised, did not collapse. It mobilized rapid repair brigades, leveraged reserve lines, and pursued countermeasures. Mobile pipeline units, encryption and jamming systems, decoy pipelines, and increased security along energy corridors. Yet Ukrainian confidence grew, proof that energy nodes deep in hostile territory were not invulnerable. Long-term, the strike reshaped doctrine. Energy lines would now be battlefield targets, pipelines would be hardened, security zones expanded, and drone logistics integrated into military campaigns. Russia revised plans, shifting flows, raising costs, and rethinking its energy posture. Ukraine, for its part, invested further in drone development, AI targeting, and strategic energy disruption. European powers assessed the risk of targeting energy infrastructure, war realities seeping into civilian networks. Ultimately, what happened after the strike was as telling as the strike itself. Escalation, adaptation, suffering, and renewed determination. The midnight attack on the gas line became a foothold, a signal to Russia and the world that energy warfare had arrived. And as winter loomed, the contest over warmth, power, and gas would become as fierce as any battlefield struggle.